Good evening and welcome to our viewers at home tonight, and also welcome to our special guests here in studio with us. My name is Ayanda Nyoka and I will be facilitating tonight's discussion. And for those of you that are watching at home and would love to be part of this discussion and to pose questions to our guests here tonight, you can follow us on Twitter. We are having this conversation under the hashtag TRCat20. You can also go on Facebook and like the page of the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation. There you will have an opportunity to pose your questions. Just to say that tonight we're talking about youth and reconciliation in South Africa, looking back at the work of the TRC 20 years later, since the first TRC hearings were held in East London in 1996. We're reflecting on the legacy of the TRC, particularly in relation to young people and reconciliation in South Africa today. And also just to mention that this discussion forms part of a series of conversations that the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, in partnership with Cape Town TV, have been convening around the Western Cape, just encouraging dialogue and debate around what did the TRC mean for South Africans then, and what does it mean today, and how do we reconcile our past as South Africans. And so we have the pleasure today where we have esteemed panel members who are going to help us to engage with these very difficult issues. And so without any further ado, I want to welcome our guests here tonight and to introduce them. First up, on my left, we have Dr. June Bam Hutchison, who is a research fellow in archive and public culture at UCT. She's also a lecturer for Stanford University. Next to her is Miss Eleanor Duploy. She's a project leader for the Ashley Krill Youth Leadership Program at the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation. Thirdly, we have Professor Pumla Gobodo Madikizela. We know that she was a former commissioner on the TRC. She's currently at Stellenbosch University, where she is research chair for historical trauma and transformation. And lastly, we have the pleasure of having Ziyanda Sturman with us today. She is a campaign manager at a youth-based digital media agency called Levita Africa, and they are based in Woodstock. And so welcome to all of you, and thank you for being part of tonight's discussion.
Thank you.
Just to start us off, I would like to hear and just give you guys an opportunity just to share your own reflections on the whole topic of the TRC, issues of reconciliation and young people today. What are your own reflections on this topic?
I think first of all, I remind myself all the time that the youth, they're not a monolithic group. And so they're very diverse, class, gender, race, faith, and so on. And so there will be different responses, I think, in terms of the TRC. The TRC in itself, we know, has been criticized. We're very familiar with the kind of critique that's gone out. It only dealt with from 1960 to 1994. The youth, they are grappling with unemployment and loads of different issues in big ways as part of of the global world as such. And one of the key things, I think, that comes through in terms of just understanding the TRC and its limitations, is that it was very much about the individual. So youth are responding, and the youth as a collective, as a group, to them, what is happening is a very interesting kind of dialogue with the unfinished business of the TRC, that it was not about workers' groups, women as a group, as a collective. We're sitting here as women together, reflecting. It was not about exploited people, or it wasn't about LGBT issues. It was actually about the individual. So it was about trauma, it was about torture, it was about murder, executions, assassinations, but it didn't get to the community that is so wounded. And the youth is a wounded community in its diversity. But I think I'm still reminded about the kind of diversity within the group and those
responses. Thank you very much. Yes. I think those are interesting thoughts for our opening. I want us to move over to you, Eleanor, and just your own reflections. I mean, you've been working with young people and really, having a lot of interesting dialogue around reconciliation. So I'll be interested to know, what are your thoughts?
Thank you, Ayanda. And I'm so glad that that you mentioned the disclaimer about young people not all being the same, and that it's not an homogenous group. So in no way are we trying to kind of make this generalized statement about young people. So I'll be speaking from my experience working with the young people through the project with IJR. Over the past couple of years, reconciliation has been something that's been coming up in small and also big ways. And what's been interesting for me is just seeing how the young people that I've been working with have been critically engaging with it and problematizing it. And asking really important questions around whether reconciliation is the route to go, and whether this particular type of reconciliation that South Africa has come accustomed to is the way to go. So, and I think that it comes at a poignant time in the development of our country, but it also speaks to this precarious position that young people find themselves in. So it's kind of wedged between this really traumatic and horrible past and this future that has been painted for us in terms of where we are going. So I think young people are negotiating not only the big issues like reconciliation and justice, but also their own positionality.
Thank you very much, Eleanor. Interesting thoughts. Professor Phumla, I mean, what are your reflections?
You know, having served on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and being very much in the process of the commission and participating in the telling of the story of South Africa, there is no question in my mind that there was something really very powerful, very, very moving, but at the same time poignant and important historically at the time in South Africa. The commission was, while it focused on stories of people who had been traumatized, there was something about that moment of telling stories, that these stories that were presented at the commission represented a wider experience of trauma, a wider experience of Black people's pain. And the important thing about it is that we needed that language. We needed that language because it was language that restored a sense of hope in our country. A sense of hope in South Africans across the board. At the time of the commission, there was one very important criticism about the process, which was that while Black people were coming out in numbers, reaching out to perpetrators with forgiveness and with statements of reconciliation, there wasn't a very clear and strong statement from white beneficiaries of apartheid privilege, even at that time. And now, 20 years down the line, young people who were young during apartheid and were born after the 1990s, they are born into a kind of a sense of the hope of freedom. However, they have not realized the meaning of that freedom. And as we know, there is this sense of deep loss and deep sense of hopelessness. And that is what young people are responding to.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Some profound thoughts coming from you. Zianda, welcome also to you. What are your reflections?
Thank you. I'm very glad that I've now been able to speak after Prof. Phumla, specifically on how you understand the TRC being such an important and poignant moment. I think for a lot of young people, not that it isn't, but more that we're removed from that. I think it's a wonder that the TRC was 20 years ago, because it feels a lot further for some young people. I think there hasn't been a very good job of translating why we needed the TRC, why we needed reconciliation the way that we did, how it ties into our current political system, the constitution, and everything that's now sort of happening with the rebirth and the revitalization of politics and of political thinking in South Africa. So it's very interesting because I think as much as there was so much depth to the TRC, very little of it has translated, or not very little, but parts of it have been lost in these 20 years, particularly for young people who are in their late 20s, early 30s, who should have known a bit more about it. But actually, there's very little that's known and that's been recorded properly, I think, in public memory about the TRC.
Thank you very much. I mean, those are very interesting thoughts that are coming out. And I think it's quite also interesting just to have the representation of, yourself who had been part of that process firsthand, listen to very traumatic stories about what apartheid meant for South Africans. And at the same time, to have reflections of a younger person, with us today to think about how are they engaging with reconciliation. I think just to open up for discussion, Professor Phumla, you often, get a sense that young South Africans today are very much ungrateful. Given the fact that, they're quite critical, especially on social media, about the state of affairs, about the country, issues of governance, and not a lot of people are happy about that, particularly people that had fought for this country. So I would like to hear from you. Do you think that young people have an appreciation for what the TRC was able to accomplish for South Africa, but also do they even have a depth of understanding of the very critical choices that the country had to make at that particular time?
I think it doesn't matter to them what the past has been about. I mean, it matters, of course, because we live in these historical moments and the future is always related to the past. However, the most important thing for everyone, for us when we were young, was what is our experience? What is our existential challenges that we face as young people today? We did that during our time. Young people are doing that today. And even during our time, we never really thought about, well, what have our parents done in the past? We know it, but really the question is, what is our experience about the present, the experience of the present? When I talk about the crisis of the present, I talk about this kind of yawning void of emptiness that young people experience.
Hold on that thought, very interesting. We're going to pick it up after the break. Stay tuned, we're going to an ad break and we'll be back after this.
What is it to be human? Is it where we come from? Were we created by knowledge passed down? The work of those who came before? The giants upon whose shoulders we stand? Or are we shaped by where we're going? Visionaries that push us forward. The boundaries we're willing to break. The belief that we can build a better tomorrow. To be human is to dream, to hope, to stay curious. Shape your world with powerful entertainment on DSTV. Feel every moment.
I feel so good, never knew I should. I feel so good all the time. It blows my mind.
Blow your mind with Shockers, a chewy sour candy like no other, with a zingy sour center. Now available in a variety of 5 different flavors: awesome apple, crazy strawberry, chewy cherry, blackcurrant, and blueberry. Available at the store near you.
Shockers, a product of KR Sweets.
Welcome back. Tonight we're talking about youth and reconciliation. I want to continue with the discussion we had, Professor Pumla, about our South African young people, have an appreciation of the TRC, and you had already, sort of made your initial thoughts on, made your initial statements on that. Just further.
So I was just saying that what is important for young people is what is going on, in their lives, the opportunities that they were promised that have not materialized, the whole idea of an empty, meaning to this word freedom. They're supposed to be so-called born frees, but it's an empty, concept. They have not experienced this freedom. There's unemployment of themselves, of their parents. They've come from a line of poverty, the majority of them. And so they are confronted with these cycles of repetition of poverty in their homes, in their lives. So these are real issues. And so whatever the TRC has done in them, what was critical are these existential questions of who am I in a South Africa that is supposed to be free, a South Africa that is supposed to, in which I'm supposed to have been born free.
Thank you very much. I think from what you've just said, a lot of issues coming out around the material benefits of freedom. And I want to just follow on with you, Eleanor. In your work, how do you understand, this intersection between reconciliation and economic justice? Given the fact that, Dr. June also alluded to the issue of youth being faced with high unemployment, very critical challenges around education and how that poverty still persists in our country today. And so in these dialogues that you have with young people, what is that intersection between economic justice and reconciliation? And how does that even impact on young people's willingness to be part of the reconciliation agenda in South Africa?
Thanks, Ayanda. I think that's a very important question. In the work that we're doing, what we try and do is to promote dialogue, and through dialogue talk about reconciliation and what is needed of society, but also what do we need in order to promote reconciliation. And without fail,